Only one car in history needed hydraulic dampeners just to close its doors. The 140 S-Class. Stuttgart built it between 1991 and 1998, so over-engineered it nearly bankrupted Mercedes. Double-pane glass, self-closing trunk, a body so acoustically sealed that engineers had to add fake road noise so drivers wouldn't feel sensory deprived. Put Cheri Cheri Lady inside that cabin and something breaks open. The piano hits the leather, the synth hits the isolation. 30 years collapse into 4 minutes and 12 seconds. In the next 8 minutes, I'll break down exactly why this combination works, technically, acoustically, and emotionally. Tonight we're going deep into why this pairing hits the way it does. We've got the real story behind the 140, the one Mercedes doesn't put in the brochures. We've got the decade that made both this car and this song possible. And we've got the truth about why the engineers who built the 140 were told, more than once, that they had gone completely insane. Stay with us. Because by the end of this, you're never going to hear Cheri Cheri Lady the same way again. The Berlin Wall has just come down. Germany is reunified and electric with possibility. Japan is flooding the world with reliable, efficient cars that are making European manufacturers deeply uncomfortable. And Mercedes-Benz, in response to all of this, decides to build the most expensive, most complex, most overbuilt production car in the history of the company. Meanwhile, in a recording studio, Modern Talking's Cheri Cheri Lady is already a few years old and already embedded in the DNA of an entire continent. East Germany grew up on that song behind closed borders. West Germany danced to it in discotheques with marble floors. By the time the 140 arrived, that melody was already part of the wallpaper of European life. Two things born from the same moment in history. Two things that understood excess, not as a flaw, but as a philosophy. Let's talk about what the 140 actually was. Because most people have no idea. The engineers at Mercedes were given a brief that, by any reasonable standard, was absurd. Build the best car in the world. Not the best car that could be profitably manufactured. Not the best car within a sensible budget. The best car. Full stop. Chief engineer Bruno Sacco and his team took that brief seriously in a way that made the accountants physically ill. The 140 got double-pane windows as standard, the same technology used in recording studios for sound isolation. It got a self-closing trunk that would gently pull itself shut if you left it ajar. The door seals inflated pneumatically when you closed the door, creating a cabin so quiet that first-time drivers often rolled down the window just to confirm the engine was actually running. The body shell was engineered to such tight tolerances that it was measurably more rigid than anything else on the road. The suspension was designed to absorb road imperfections before the occupants could register them as discomfort. There were over 200 individual engineering innovations in the 140 that had never appeared in a production car before. The result weighed over 2,000 kilograms. It was enormous. It was excessive. It was, depending on who you asked, either the pinnacle of automotive achievement or evidence that someone in Stuttgart had completely lost touch with reality. The answer, of course, was both. Here is the part of the 140 story that Mercedes has never been entirely comfortable discussing. The development of this car almost destroyed the company. The 140 took over a decade to develop from initial concept to production. The engineering budget overran by figures that made senior executives go pale in quarterly meetings. When the car finally arrived in showrooms in 1991, the price was so high that even customers who could afford it hesitated. The 600 V12 variant cost more than most houses in Germany at the time. Mercedes had built a monument. And monuments historically are not great business. The press loved it and quietly feared it. Car journalists wrote in odd terms about the quality, and then immediately noted that nobody could justify spending this much money on transportation. The company that made it was simultaneously the most admired and the most financially stressed it had been in decades. And then something strange happened. The car survived. Not just survived, it lasted. The build quality that had bankrupted the development budget turned out to be real. 140s driven hard through the 90s were still running flawlessly into the 2000s, then the 2010s. Cars that should have been scrapped were still on the road, still closing their doors with that soft hydraulic thud, still isolating their passengers from the noise of a world that had moved on without them. The accountants had been right about the cost, the engineers had been right about the car, and the market had eventually sorted out who mattered more. The 140 is not a footnote. It is the argument that sometimes doing something the right way is more important than doing it the profitable way now. The song Cheri Cheri Lady by Modern Talking was released in 1985. By the time the 140 arrived 6 years later, that song was already a piece of cultural furniture, something you heard in hotel lobbies and supermarkets and late-night television without really registering it. Background music. Wallpaper. But put it inside a 1A40 at the right moment, at the right speed, on the right kind of empty road, and something shifts. The song is built on contrast. That synthesizer line is melancholy, but the tempo is forward-moving. There's something wistful in it, something that reaches backward even as it pushes forward. It's nostalgic for something that wasn't even over yet. And that quality, that particular emotional tension, maps onto the 1A40 with an accuracy that no engineer could have planned and no marketing department could have manufactured. The 1A40 is also built on contrast. It is enormous, but it moves with unexpected grace. It is heavy, but the ride is so composed that passengers feel weightless. It is built from materials that suggest permanence. Genuine wood, thick leather, steel door cards, in a way that makes the impermanence of everything outside the cabin feel suddenly obvious. Both the car and the song understand something that the modern world has largely forgotten. That quality takes time, that some things deserve to be done slowly. That comfort is not weakness. When Dieter Bohlen wrote that melody, he wasn't thinking about Mercedes-Benz. When Bruno Sacco was engineering door dampers, he wasn't thinking about pop music. But somewhere in the overlap between those two men's obsessions, something true got made. The sound fills a cabin that was built specifically to hold sound perfectly. The isolation that cost Mercedes so much money turns out to be the ideal environment for that particular song. You are sealed inside both simultaneously, the music and the machine, and the outside world gets very, very far away. Here is the moment people describe when they talk about this combination. It's not a dramatic moment. That's what makes it interesting. You're not racing anyone. You're not at a car show. You're on a highway at night, or a country road in the early morning, or a city street when the traffic has finally cleared. The 140 is doing what it was designed to do. Absorbing the road, maintaining its composure, moving its 2,000 kilograms from one place to another with a kind of unhurried authority that modern cars simply do not have. And then the song starts. That synthesizer line comes in, and for a second, nothing changes. And then, without anything physical happening, everything changes. The cabin feels different. The speed feels different. The weight of the car beneath you becomes something you're grateful for, rather than something you're merely aware of. People who have experienced this moment describe it in almost identical terms. There is a word that keeps coming up. They say it feels like arriving. Not arriving somewhere specific. Just arriving. As though the destination was always this exact combination of speed and sound and leather and steel, and you've been on your way here since before you knew where you were going. The 140 was built for this, not for Cheri Cheri Lady specifically. The engineers had no idea this would happen. But they built a car with such acoustic precision, such thermal and vibrational isolation, such intentional separation between the world inside and the world outside, that it became the perfect vessel for exactly this kind of experience. The song ends. The road continues. You reach for the volume knob to play it again. So what does it mean? It means that the 140 was right and the accountants were wrong, not about money, but about what cars are for. A car is not just transportation. At its best, a car is an environment. It is a controlled space that exists between one place and another, and what happens inside that space is determined entirely by what the people who built it believed was worth doing carefully. The engineers who built the 140 believed that silence was worth engineering, that the sound of a closing door was worth hydraulic dampening, that the gap between the world and the passenger was worth spending money on when there was no rational financial justification for doing so. That belief, that particular obsession with the quality of the interior experience, is exactly why Cheri Cheri Lady works inside this car when it doesn't quite work the same way anywhere else. You can play that song in a modern luxury car and it will sound good. You can play it in a sports car and the exhaust note will drown it out before the chorus. But in the 140 it sounds exactly like itself. Nothing added, nothing taken away, nothing competing with it for your attention. The car does what it was built to do. The song does what it was written to do. And for a few minutes on whatever road you happen to be on, you are not in the present. You are somewhere adjacent to the past, somewhere the light is different and the speeds are lower and nothing requires your immediate attention. That's what the overengineering was for. That's what the bankruptcy-level development budget was for. Not to win a comparison test in a magazine. Not to outsell BMW or embarrass Rolls-Royce. It was for this. For the precise quality of stillness that happens when a 30-year-old song meets a 30-year-old car, and neither of them has any interest in being modern. The 140 is not fashionable. It is not efficient. It will not parallel park itself, or tell you about traffic, or suggest a restaurant. It will, however, give you something that no amount of software can replicate. The feeling that someone cared enormously about the 30 square feet of space you are sitting in and spent an unreasonable amount of time and money making sure it was exactly right. Cheri Cheri Lady hits different in a 140 because the 140 was built by people who understood that some things are worth doing for their own sake. The song understands the same thing, so we'll ask you this. Do you have a car and a song that does this to you? A combination that makes something ordinary feel like something else entirely? Tell us in the comments. And if someone you know is still holding on to a 140, tell them they're right. They always were. If this reached something you didn't expect it to reach, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel. Next week we're going into another machine that was built the wrong way for all the right reasons. Until then, roll the windows up, turn it up, and drive. Walk around the 140 and you start to notice things that other manufacturers would never bother with. The gaps between the body panels, what engineers call shut lines, are measured in fractions of a millimeter and consistent all the way around the car. Not consistent because a machine measured them once. Consistent because human inspectors measured them after the machine, and then again before the car left the factory. It was a process that added time and money to every single unit produced, and that contributed directly to the financial pressure that nearly ended the program. The headlights were designed to provide maximum illumination at exactly the height and angle that would benefit the driver without blinding oncoming traffic. This sounds straightforward. It is not straightforward. It required hundreds of hours of road testing in different countries, because road camber varies between nations, and what works perfectly in Germany needs adjustment for British roads and further adjustment for American highways. Mercedes did all of this testing. Mercedes adjusted all of these things. Mercedes did not tell anyone they had done it because there was no way to advertise it without sounding as though they had invented the concept of headlights. The paint process involved more individual stages than any other production car of the era. Not because Mercedes believed customers would notice, they wouldn't, and they didn't, but because the engineers believed the correct number of stages was the correct number of stages, regardless of whether the additional steps were commercially rational. This is the thing about the 140 that is hardest to explain to someone who hasn't spent time with one. It was not built to be impressive, it was built to be correct. The impressiveness is a side effect of the correctness, and the two things feel completely different from the inside. Modern talking understood something about production that the 140's engineers would have recognized immediately, that the space around the sound matters as much as the sound itself. Dieter Bohlen's production on Cheri Cheri Lady is built on space. The synthesizer lines are given room to breathe. The reverb is long and deliberate, creating the impression of a large, quiet room even when played on a small speaker. It is music that was mixed to sound good in the kind of environments where people actually listened to music in 1985. Car stereos, home hi-fi systems, the echo-y acoustics of a European discotheque. It was mixed, in other words, for exactly the kind of acoustic environment that the 140 was engineered to create. The 140's cabin achieves its silence not through absorption, padding that swallows sound, but through isolation. The double-pane glass, the inflating door seals, the acoustic barrier built into the firewall, all work together to keep the outside world out. What you hear inside is what you choose to put there. The car adds nothing. It removes everything else. This is the technical reason why Cheri Cheri Lady sounds different in a 140 than it does anywhere else. The production values of the recording and the engineering values of the cabin were built on the same principle. Create a controlled space, then put the important thing inside it, and let the important thing be itself. Today, a clean 140-600 changes hands for figures that would have seemed impossible 20 years ago when these cars were just used Mercedes that nobody wanted. The market has been slow to recognize what collectors of a certain kind of taste already knew, that the 140 represents a specific moment in automotive history that cannot be repeated. It cannot be repeated because the conditions that produced it no longer exist. No modern manufacturer has the combination of single-minded engineering culture, absence of meaningful competition in the ultra-luxury segment, and willingness to absorb financial pain in pursuit of correctness that Mercedes had in the late 1980s when the 140 was being developed. The car was possible because a specific set of circumstances made it possible, and those circumstances are gone. What remains is the car. 30 years old. Still closing its doors with that hydraulic sigh. Still isolating its passengers from the world outside. Still, when you put the right song on and find the right road, making you feel like you've arrived somewhere that was always waiting for you. The early 90s were a strange time to build something as serious as the 140. The world was moving fast. The Soviet Union was dissolving. The internet was being born in university laboratories. Pop culture was fragmenting into a dozen different directions simultaneously. In that context, building a car that took a decade to develop and prioritized the feeling of a closing door seemed almost deliberately out of step with where everything was going. But Mercedes had always been slightly out of step. The company's entire identity was built on the idea that certain things were worth doing properly, regardless of whether the moment called for them. The 140 was not a product of its time. It was a response to its time, a monument built by people who believed that speed and efficiency and disruption were not, by themselves, enough. Cheri Cheri Lady, released 6 years before the 140 arrived in showrooms, belonged to that same counterintuitive tradition. In a decade of punk and new wave and aggressive deconstruction, Modern Talking made pop music that was unabashedly melodic, unambiguously romantic, and completely unconcerned with being cool. It was not trying to be ahead of anything. It was trying to be beautiful, and it succeeded, and it has outlasted 1,000 more fashionable things that tried much harder. The 140 arrived when Germany was asking who it was going to be now that the wall was gone. The song already knew who it was. And somehow, decades later, they found each other on the same empty road,